Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. On a blazing Utah afternoon, ex-Sheriff Travis Milton kicked up a jet ski wake on his private lake, unaware that across the water, an HOA crusader named Karen was watching. Clipboard in hand and outrage loaded, she was ready to start a war over property lines and ducks. Let the battle begin. It was one of those blazing Utah afternoons when the sun makes everything shimmer like it's dipped in gasoline. I just finished oiling the hinges on the boathouse door and decided it was time to break out the Sea-Doo. My wife, Jolene, hollered from the porch, already slipping on her life vest. We didn't need to say a word. It was jet ski time. The lake stretched wide and still behind our house, 100 acres of deep blue carved into the red earth like it had been poured there just for us. And technically, it had been. I bought this land, lake included, over 10 years ago after retiring from the sheriff's department. Put it in the name of my holding company. Every inch of shoreline, every cattail marsh, every trickle feeding into the dam outback. Private, titled, recorded, and posted. And when I say posted, I mean it. Private property, no trespassing. Restricted water signs ringed the lake like warning buoys. My pier stood proudly in the southern cove, just a few dozen feet from the house, with a couple of cameras mounted under the awning, the kind that can read the date on a fishing license from 50 yards. Not that I had to use them often. Most folks around here respected boundaries, until they didn't. We'd just kick the Sea-Doo into gear, Jolene whooping as we cut across the water, leaving a fine mist in our wake. It was the good stuff, a supercharged RXPX, top of the line. I could feel the engine humming through my spine. We carved wide turns and dragged a rooster tail across the cove, the kind of ride that made all the stress of the week melt right off. The lake was ours, like always. Or so I thought. As we pulled up to the pier for a quick break and to grab drinks from the cooler, I spotted her, standing at the end of my dock like she owned it. Blonde bob, floppy hat, clipboard in one hand, and some kind of badge on a lanyard that I was almost certain she printed at home. I'd seen her before, from a distance mostly. She was one of the newer residents across the lake, part of the recently formed HOA over in the Oakwind Shores development. They'd put up their cookie-cutter homes on a plot that used to be scrubland, boxed in their lawns with fake wrought iron, and decided they were stewards of nature now. "Excuse me," she called out, waving her clipboard like it was a traffic flag. "Sir, I need you to cut your engine immediately." I killed the throttle and looked at Jolene, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We coasted in. "You're creating excessive wake," she snapped, before we'd even climbed off. "You're disturbing the waterfowl nesting areas. That's a direct violation of community policy." I stepped onto the dock and peeled off my gloves. "Which community would that be?" "Oakwind Shores," she said proudly. "I'm Karen Stewart. I'm the environmental coordinator for the Homeowners Association." "Don't live in Oakwind," I said flatly. "But you're on the lake." "Yes," I nodded. "My lake." She frowned like a teacher dealing with a particularly defiant third grader. "The lake is part of the shared visual ecosystem and is subject to environmental guidelines under our HOA. You'll need to submit a request to operate motorized watercraft. Otherwise, we can fine you." I stared at her. No, really stared. Jolene was already digging in the cooler, cracking a cold one and watching the show. Behind Karen, one of my signs glinted in the sun. Private property. No HOA jurisdiction. I pointed to it with a slow, deliberate motion. She turned, saw it, and her face tightened. "I'm going to need to see your authorization," she snapped. "You can't just claim a lake." I didn't answer, just climbed back onto the Sea-Doo, started it up, and motored off with Jolene behind me. I didn't even spare her a second glance. What I didn't expect, though I probably should have, was her pulling out her phone before we hit the far side of the cove. She dialed with a furious jab of her finger, already pacing the end of my dock. We couldn't hear her over the engine, but Jolene leaned in and said, "She's calling the cops, isn't she?" I nodded. "Yup." The squad car showed up just as we were tying off back at the dock. Jolene was still laughing about Karen's clipboard speech when the gravel crunched near the boat ramp, and I saw those familiar red and blues wash over the trees. I knew the cruiser by sound before I even turned. V8 rumble, slight misfire in the idle. Had to be local. When the door opened, I smiled. Deputy Chris Harrow stepped out, shades on, hand resting near his belt like it always did, even when we were partners. He looked around, took in the scene, and then saw me. "Travis," he said, lowering his shades. "In the flesh," I replied. He blew a short puff of air through his nose, shook his head, and walked over. Got a call from a woman claiming a stranger was disturbing wildlife and trespassing on HOA property via jet ski. Let me guess, I said. Blonde hair, clipboard, entitlement complex. That'd be the one, he muttered. Behind him, Karen came marching up the driveway like she was leading a parade, brandishing her phone as if it were an arrest warrant. I want him cited immediately, she barked. He was threatening the safety of our lake and harassing birds. He refused to comply with community boating regulations and verbally assaulted me. I opened my mouth, but Chris held up a hand. Let's take this one step at a time. He turned to her. Ma'am, can you show me documentation stating this area falls under your HOA's jurisdiction? Karen looked caught off guard. Well, not precisely this area, but the lake is part of the Oakwind Shores community. We share the ecosystem. It's public by use. Chris didn't flinch. So no title, no easement, no agreement with the property owner. Karen faltered. But I'm an environmental coordinator. I have the authority to... You don't, I interrupted, walking past her. Chris, come with me. I led him inside the house, down the hall to my office, and unlocked the safe with a code I'd been using since my first week in the sheriff's department. Inside were birth certificates, passports, and the real treasure, the deed packet. I slid it onto the desk and opened the folder to the relevant pages. Here, I said, tapping the title page. Private ownership registered with the Utah Division of Water Rights. Parcel numbers, map coordinates, full basin control. That lake's mine, legally, economically, and hydrologically. Chris leaned in, flipping through the pages with practiced eyes. Damn, you've even got maintenance logs here for the dam inspection. Yup, last one was March. I also pay the annual runoff stabilization fee to the county. He looked up at me and cracked a grin. You always were thorough. Karen barged in without knocking. You can't just produce a piece of paper and pretend the law doesn't apply. Chris turned. His smile vanished. Ma'am, you just unlawfully entered private residence during an active police conversation. I suggest you step back outside. You're siding with him, she shrieked. I'm siding with the law, he said firmly, which says he owns the lake, every inch of it. You don't even have right of passage, let alone regulatory authority. She tried again. But this is about environmental protection. About the good of the community. Chris stared her down. You lied on a 911 call. You claimed a stranger was trespassing. That's a misuse of emergency services and false reporting. Karen's face went red. I didn't lie. I misunderstood the situation. I handed Chris another document. This is the surveillance footage from my dock cam. She was on my property, tried to issue me a fine with a fake notice, and made threats. Chris took it, nodded slowly, and said, Karen Stewart, I'm going to need you to step outside. We're done here. She didn't move. Her eyes darted from me to the desk to the camera in the corner. Then she pivoted and stomped out like her shoes were trying to punch holes in the hardwood. Chris sighed and looked at me. You want to press charges? Not yet, I said, but I do want a formal report filed, and I'll be contacting the county prosecutor's office about interference with private property. You got it, he said. And Travis? Next time she calls, I might just bring a lawn chair. A few days passed, and I figured that would be the end of it. Karen had been put in her place. The cops knew the score, and my property lines were more documented than a Vegas casino floor plan. I spent the next morning clearing brush near the north inlet, getting things ready for summer trout stocking. Jolene brought me lunch down at the boathouse, and we even joked about hanging a sign saying, "Warning, jet skis may cause emotional damage to nearby Karens." But peace never lasts when an HOA smells power. On Friday afternoon, just as I was hauling lumber for a new bench at the pier, Jolene came down the hill waving a bright orange flyer. "You're gonna love this," she said, handing it over. At the top, in bold, all caps, "Notice of legal action regarding lake access, HOA community rights." Beneath it, some stiff legalese about historic community use of Lake Milton, which they'd just started calling it, apparently. Claims of environmental disruption, and a statement that the HOA was seeking formal recognition of the water body as a shared asset subject to HOA policy. At the bottom, we encourage residents to sign the enclosed petition to support reclassification of the lake as a common use feature of Oakwind Shores. I laughed out loud. They think they can annex the lake by petition. Jolene didn't laugh. Check the back. I flipped it over. There it was. A poorly redrawn map of the neighborhood, with a giant shaded blob labeled Community Lake Access Zone. It bled right over my land, dock, even part of my house. They're passing this out to everyone on the east side, Jolene said. Kids on bikes drop them in mailboxes. I called Sharon. She's furious. Says Karen told her it's already as good as done. I felt a vein twitch in my neck. This wasn't just HOA theater anymore. This was a coordinated attempt to fabricate public perception, a land grab on paper. I called my attorney that evening, Gordon McCready, a retired federal prosecutor out of Salt Lake City who didn't suffer fools or clipboard tyrants. I explained everything, and by the time I was done, he was already pulling up parcel maps. They're attempting to establish a public easement through implied use, he said. Classic gambit. They'll say the lake has been used by the community and is therefore subject to public regulation. But it hasn't, I snapped. They weren't even here until 5 years ago. Doesn't matter to them. They're not looking for truth. They're looking for legal ambiguity. If they can get a judge to buy into the shared access argument, they'll try to slap restrictions on you. I heard his keyboard clacking. Get me copies of the flyers, the map, and any statements from neighbors. We're going on offense. That night, I walked the perimeter of my property and took pictures of every signpost, every gate, every posted warning, all dated, some as far back as 2014. Then I printed out my water rights documents, maintenance records, and drone images of the lake showing zero use by anyone but me. The evidence was solid. But I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know, in court, truth doesn't matter if you let someone else tell the story first. 2 days later, Gordon filed a preemptive civil complaint. Not just a defense, but a counterclaim. The HOA was named for defamation, interference with private business plans, and distribution of misleading material regarding real property. We also included an affidavit from an environmental consultant confirming my exclusive maintenance and protection of the lake's wildlife, on my dime. And then came the kicker. Karen had doctored the map. She'd taken a publicly available zoning diagram and shaded in new zones with digital tools, making it look like the HOA's jurisdiction extended over my property. Gordon's assistant found the metadata in the file. It had been saved under her own name. We attached that too. By Wednesday, every member of the Oakwind Shores Board had been served. I watched from the end of my pier as the process server handed Karen her envelope on her driveway. She tried to slam the door, but not before her husband asked, "What the hell is this?" She didn't answer, just stood there in her bathrobe, looking like someone had poured vinegar into her oatmeal. 3 days after the process servers did their rounds, I got a call from Channel 4 out of Provo. A local reporter had gotten wind of the lawsuit, likely tipped off by one of the HOA board members who thought they'd spin the narrative in their favor. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Dana Lynn, said she wanted to understand the story from both sides, and asked if she could stop by for an interview. "Only if you bring boots," I said. "It's still muddy near the dam." Dana arrived with a cameraman, both in spotless sneakers and that cautious city energy, the kind of folks who looked like they'd never seen a real fence post. I showed her around, the boathouse, the maintenance logs, the dam controls, the irrigation channels, the whole lake ecosystem that I'd personally restored after the original rancher let it fall into silt and ruin. I even pointed out the heron nesting platforms I'd had installed by a wildlife nonprofit. All on my dime. She seemed surprised. "They said you were disturbing the ecosystem," she said, flipping through her notes. "Yeah, and I suppose I also killed the Easter Bunny and spit in the Colorado River," I muttered. "The only thing I've disturbed is their fantasy of owning something they don't." She laughed at that. Not just politely, genuinely. She knew a manufactured crisis when she saw one. That night, the segment aired. It opened with Karen standing at the edge of the lake, probably the public boat launch down the road, gesturing at the water and talking about wildlife terrorized by jet skis and an aggressive man refusing to acknowledge community rules. But then the camera cut to me, shirt dusty, sleeves rolled, pointing at my property markers and showing the deed on camera. Dana did a voiceover about the lawsuit, the counterclaim, and the forged map, including a close-up of Karen's name in the metadata. The segment ended with a beautiful wide drone shot of the lake, the dam, the dock, all clearly within my parcel lines. I thought that would shut things down. I was wrong. The next morning, I got a knock at the door. Not police this time. 2 guys in khakis and polos holding clipboards with county logos. They introduced themselves as inspectors from the Division of Environmental Quality, here to conduct a spot inspection related to recent citizen complaints. Complaints about what? I asked. Possible violations of protected wetland zones and wake-induced shoreline erosion, one said. He looked like a fresh intern trying to impress someone. I didn't slam the door, but I stepped out, closed it gently behind me, and asked them to clarify under what authority they were here and what code their inspection fell under. They mumbled something about anonymous concerns and possible community impact. They had no warrant, no pre-filed report, and no probable cause. You were sent here because someone pulled a string, I said flatly. We're just here to observe, the other one said. Well, observe from the road, I replied. Unless you've got paperwork and a court order, you're not stepping foot on my dock. They left, frustrated, but it confirmed what I'd suspected. Karen wasn't backing down. She was escalating. That night, Gordon called. They've filed a formal motion in civil court. They want an injunction against motorized use of the lake pending reclassification. They're citing public interest. I laughed, though it sounded more like a growl. Public interest in something they don't own? They're getting desperate, Gordon said. But if a judge agrees to a temporary injunction before the hearing, they could freeze your lake use for weeks. We need to hit them harder. So we did. The next morning, I had my own environmental consultant, the one who'd helped restore the lake bed, draft a comprehensive impact report showing zero shoreline damage from watercraft. I attached years of wildlife population records, drone surveys, and photos of Karen herself dumping birdseed dangerously close to the lake's edge, which, fun fact, had drawn in raccoons and disrupted the nesting birds she claimed to be protecting. We filed a motion to dismiss their injunction with prejudice and added intentional harassment as a supplemental cause of action. I was done playing defense. The hearing for the injunction was set for a Tuesday morning in county civil court, a courtroom I knew too well from my years hauling meth cooks and cattle thieves in front of a judge. But this time, I wore a blazer instead of a badge and carried a case file 2 inches thick with evidence. Gordon met me out front, holding a coffee in one hand, and the kind of confidence that only came from watching the opposing counsel trip over their own shoelaces. Inside, the room was half full, a few residents from Oakland Shores who clearly came to support their cause, plus Karen herself, decked out in a muted blue pantsuit like she was presenting a TED Talk on passive aggression. She sat behind her lawyer, a young guy named Mallory, who looked like he'd prepped for court by watching legal dramas and printing out Wikipedia pages. The judge, Honorable Mary Ann Keyes, didn't waste time. This is a hearing for a preliminary injunction filed by the Oakland Shores Homeowners Association against Mr. Travis Milton, she said crisply, claiming that continued use of personal watercraft on the contested lake area presents environmental and public welfare concerns. Karen's attorney stood and launched into a monologue about watershed integrity, communal riparian rights, and long-standing community use. He even invoked Native American reverence for shared water, which was rich considering Karen once tried to evict a Navajo woman over wind chimes. Judge Keyes raised an eyebrow. Do you have any documentation that your clients hold title or easement rights to this body of water? Well, Your Honor, we believe the pattern of use constitutes implied. She cut him off. Belief is not title. Then it was Gordon's turn. Calm, direct, lethal. He laid out the title chain, the restoration costs, the environmental impact assessments, and the business plan I had filed for limited entry sport fishing, with permits. He showed the metadata on the HOA's fake map. He showed aerial drone footage of my signs, gates, and shoreline markers dating back a decade. He even played a muted clip from Channel 4's segment. Then came the real twist. We brought in Dr. Ellison, a respected hydrologist from the state university who had analyzed the lake's runoff, water level management, and flood control systems. She testified, under oath, that not only was the lake fully contained within my property, but it played a crucial role in downstream watershed balance that I personally maintained. Karen's lawyer objected, something about prejudicial weight. The judge overruled him. Then Gordon dropped the bomb. Your Honor, we've also submitted into the record a motion for sanctions, as the HOA knowingly submitted a digitally manipulated map to this court with the intent to mislead. He passed the enlarged map to the judge. Her eyes narrowed. Is this true? She asked, turning to Mallory. Mallory opened his mouth, then turned to Karen, who for the first time looked like she realized this wasn't a bake sale. Her lips parted, then closed again. No answer came. "Motion for injunction is denied," Judge Keyes said, writing with rapid strokes. "This court finds no legal or equitable basis to restrict Mr. Milton's lawful use of his private lake. Additionally, the court will review the motion for sanctions in a separate hearing." Karen didn't stand. She just sat there, slack-jawed. Outside the courthouse, 2 local papers were waiting. Gordon gave a crisp statement. I didn't say much, just smiled and said, "Lake's still mine." Then I shook hands with a deputy I used to train back in the day and drove home. That night, Jolene and I had ribs and whiskey on the deck. It was quiet. The frogs were back. The lake was like glass, and the stars didn't care about HOAs. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the last of it. Then, at dawn, the damn cameras caught something. Karen, in a hoodie and rubber boots, standing on my dock. She was sticking something under the bench. I zoomed in. A laminated violation warning, unauthorized dock use, subject to fine. I didn't get mad. I just called the sheriff. The sheriff's cruiser rolled down my gravel driveway before the sun had fully crested the hills. I met Deputy Coombs by the barn, a guy I'd trained back when he was still wearing his duty belt like it didn't belong to him. He shook my hand and looked equal parts amused and annoyed. "Milton," he said, "I figured I'd be out here again sooner or later. You got the footage?" I led him into the boathouse office where I had my security feed set up across 3 monitors. We rolled back the timestamp to 5:03 a.m., and there she was, Karen, moving like a poorly trained cat burglar, sliding up the dock with that laminated HOA violation warning clutched in her hand like it was sacred scripture. She knelt, pulled some kind of adhesive strip from her coat pocket, and slapped the warning under my bench. Then she stood back, admired her work, and left. Deputy Coombs leaned in. "She's got nerve. I'll give her that." "She's got trespassing charges now," I replied. "That sign is her confession." He agreed. Photos were taken. A report was filed. He said he'd personally deliver it to the DA for misdemeanor trespass and possible tampering with posted property. Not a felony, but still. Enough to rattle some sense into her. Or so I hoped. But Karen didn't rattle. She doubled down. That afternoon, my phone blew up. Sharon from 2 lots over called first. "Did you see this?" she asked, barely able to keep her voice steady. "They put it in every mailbox this morning. It was a new flyer, even more unhinged than the last. Emergency petition, protect our lake from reckless owners." They claimed that I was creating public endangerment, that I threatened HOA members with litigation to silence free speech, and, the kicker, that I used political connections from prior law enforcement work to suppress legitimate environmental complaints. That was personal. That was defamation. I called Gordon immediately. "This is libel and it's deliberate. I want to go nuclear." "You'll get your wish," he said. "I just got a call from the DA's office. They're not only taking the trespass charge, they're opening a case on the fraudulent map submission and the 911 call from weeks ago. Looks like someone tipped them off that this wasn't her first incident like this." I felt a slow burn build behind my ribs. I looked out at the lake, my lake, calm, blue, and glinting under the late sun, like it didn't give a damn about HOA drama. But I did. I made a decision right then and there. If they wanted to claim I was endangering their imaginary rights, I'd show them what real enforcement looked like, legally and precisely. The next morning, I installed a biometric lock system on the boathouse, reinforced the dock gate, and hired a private security consultant to set up motion-sensing perimeter cameras along the tree line near the HOA property boundary. If anyone crossed that invisible line again, I'd have footage, coordinates, and timestamps down to the millisecond. Then I published my own statement, not a flyer, but a notarized letter posted online and hand-delivered to every homeowner within 3 miles. To whom it may concern, the lake known as Milton Reservoir is private property, as confirmed by deed and judicial ruling. Unauthorized use, entry, or dissemination of false claims regarding said property will be met with full legal response. Future trespassers will be prosecuted. Signed, Travis L. Milton, owner and water rights holder. And just to drive the point home, I commissioned a 20-foot-long steel sign to be mounted on the bluff overlooking the HOA shoreline. Private lake. Trespassers will be sued and humiliated. The day we put it up, I heard a scream from across the water. Karen. She was standing at her back porch in what looked like a bathrobe and slippers, pointing and yelling to no one in particular. I didn't wave. I just started up the Sea-Doo and did a slow, steady loop of the shoreline, waves lapping up against her little decorative canoe rack like punctuation marks. She called the sheriff again that night. They didn't send anyone. 3 days after the sign went up, Gordon called me from Salt Lake with that tone he only used when things were about to get very interesting. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. "The HOA just filed a new lawsuit." I didn't sit. I leaned against the railing of my deck, overlooking the lake, a mug of black coffee in my hand, and Jolene out by the garden pulling weeds like it was just any other Tuesday. "What now?" I asked. "They're petitioning to have the lake declared a public recreational resource under a community easement theory. They're citing some vague doctrine about long-standing use and regional benefit. They even pulled a professor from some liberal arts college to file an affidavit claiming the lake has cultural significance." I blinked. Cultural significance? What culture? HOA Barbecue Club. "They're getting desperate," Gordon said. "But here's the kicker, they submitted another map. And guess what? It's different again." That did it. I drove into town, met Gordon at the courthouse, and we pulled the full docket. The HOA was now attempting to create a public use argument retroactively, claiming the lake had been informally accepted by the community and that my exclusive actions threatened their communal identity. They even tried to argue that my signs were acts of intimidation. I told Gordon we needed to crush this before it could breathe. "We're filing a counter-motion," he said. "Interference with business, malicious prosecution, and, this time, fraud in official filings. They doctored evidence again, and we can prove it." That evening, I went back through my own archives. 10 years of property records, satellite imagery, drone videos, all showing the boundaries, the fences, the dock construction, the restoration efforts. I also found something golden, a letter from the original seller of the property, confirming in writing that the water rights and lake bed were exclusive and sold with title. I sent it to Gordon. His reply was simple: "They're toast." The next week, subpoenas went out. Karen and 2 board members, Roy Templeton and Diane Pierce, were summoned to give depositions under oath. I attended Karen's in person. She looked tired. Less Botox, more twitch. Gordon opened with simple questions. "Have you ever seen the deed to the lake? Did you or your board ever survey the property line? Who created the map submitted with the complaint?" She dodged, danced, claimed she wasn't directly involved in the filings, that the board acted in good faith. Then Gordon dropped the printed email, pulled during discovery, where she explicitly instructed the HOA's graphic designer to shade in the western cove so it looks like part of our zone. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I watched the court reporter glance up, probably wondering if she'd need to read that moment back for a jury someday. Then Roy's deposition sealed it. When asked if he'd ever maintained any part of the lake or paid into its upkeep, he said, "Well, no, that's always been Travis's deal. We just thought, maybe we had a shot." That gem made it into our final brief. Gordon filed a motion to dismiss their lawsuit with prejudice, plus damages for defamation, business disruption, and legal expenses. He also requested the court consider referral for criminal investigation for presenting doctored exhibits. The hearing was scheduled for the following month, but Karen wasn't done. The night before the court date, one of my game cameras near the dam triggered. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. 2 figures, Karen and Diane. They were spray painting something onto the dock's retaining wall in giant red letters. Next morning, I found it. "Communist thug. This ain't Russia." The irony hit me so hard I nearly choked on my thermos coffee. I called Deputy Coombs, sent him the video, and by noon, he was out with evidence bags and arrest warrants. Karen and Diane were taken in for vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. By the time the court hearing opened the next day, they were out on bail, but their reputations? Shredded. The final hearing drew a bigger crowd than the last high school football game. Local news vans lined the street outside the courthouse. The gallery was packed with neighbors, city folks, reporters, and a few board law students who must have smelled blood in the water. Karen walked in wearing a beige suit and oversized sunglasses, like she was auditioning for a prison docuseries. Diane trailed behind her, looking like she regretted every friendship bracelet she and Karen had ever exchanged. Gordon was calm. Me, I was still fuming, but composed. I'd seen worse in my time as a sheriff, but never quite this level of smug stupidity wrapped in HOA letterhead. Judge Keyes didn't waste breath. She launched straight into the motion to dismiss. "This court has reviewed the materials presented," she said, flipping through a heavy file. "What I see is a pattern of abuse of process, attempted manipulation of legal boundaries, and the submission of falsified materials." Karen's attorney tried a last-ditch effort. "Your Honor, the defendants were acting in defense of perceived communal interest." "Perceived is not actual," Judge Keyes snapped, "nor is it a defense for trespass, harassment, or vandalism." She ruled in our favor on every count. The HOA's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile it ever again. Then she approved $480,000 in damages, covering legal fees, reputational damage to my business, and punitive costs for their malicious conduct. Then came the real kicker. The judge referred the HOA board, specifically Karen and Diane, for criminal investigation on two fronts: filing false evidence in court and misuse of emergency services, referencing the 911 call Karen made weeks ago when I was jet skiing on my own. Damn, Lake. That wasn't the end. 2 weeks later, a grand jury indicted both Karen and Diane. Charges included filing a false report, falsifying documents, and criminal trespass. Karen tried to spin it as political retaliation, but the DA's office didn't care. Her mugshot ran in the local paper under the headline, "HOA Tyrant Faces Felony Charges Over Lake Dispute." Oakwind Shores fell into chaos. The board resigned en masse, a temporary manager was appointed, and several residents emailed me, not to apologize, of course, but to clarify that they never supported Karen's methods. One even asked if I'd consider letting them host a summer potluck by the lake to rebuild bridges. I sent a reply that simply read, "No." That same week, I finalized the contract with an exclusive members-only fishing lodge startup. They'd been scouting properties for years and jumped at the chance to lease rights from a private, professionally managed lake. We launched under the name Milton Waters Retreat, and within a month, we had a year-long wait list. I built a new dock, bigger, better, with reinforced aluminum rails and solar lighting. We added motion sensors to the bluff and a drone patrol system tied to a private security contractor. No more late-night graffiti, no more HOA games. Jolene and I stood out there one night, watching the sun sink over the water, gold streaks melting into blue. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and asked, "Still think buying this place was crazy?" She laughed. "Oh, absolutely. But at least now we have the most infamous lake in the county." Behind us, the new sign gleamed in the dark. "Private lake. Trespassers will be sued and humiliated." Karen's house went up for sale the next week. She moved out in silence. No flyers, no speeches, no community vision. The HOA sent me a letter 3 weeks later. It said simply, "On behalf of Oakwind Shores, we apologize for any misunderstanding and hope to move forward in peaceful coexistence. Please let us know if you would be open to sharing images of the lake for our seasonal marketing brochure." I didn't even respond, but just to be clear, I had the security gate upgraded to include facial recognition. Let them advertise peace. I'll advertise property lines.